I'm about to make something delicious today, and it requires some pork. A Jack Mountain pork, looks good. So today I'm gonna be making Tonkatsu, which is really the authentic version of chicken katsu, deep fried chicken, but ton is pork, so hence pork katsu. Tonkatsu. I'm gonna be showing you everything I buy, my tips on how to make it super crispy and delicious. Let's go ahead and get the other ingredients. I didn't explain, but you want to get pork chops. This one has the bone in. I'll probably end up cutting it off. Nice thick pork chop will work just fine. I did also get some pork chops with no bones in it, just for convenience. Definitely want to also grab some cabbage. Cabbage salad is a must when eating tonkatsu. I'll show you how to prepare it too. Alright, so another thing I do use is pork fat to deep fry. Kind of expensive, but way better for you than if you were to just use any kind of seed oil. Last but not least, beer. So this is Aslan Brewing. It's the only organic beer that I know of around here. And they have the special Japanese style lager beer, which is already a cool can. Normally you get their classic, which is, it says light lager, but it's more like a pilsner, so I'm gonna get this. Kind of expensive as well, but you know what? Delicious. All right, so I'm back home and I'm gonna get dinner prepared, but there's a few things you want to do first before you actually cook the tonkatsu. So what I'm doing is laying out all the pork. I'm gonna chop off the bone parts, and then I'm gonna do something a little bit later. I'll show you afterwards. The ingredients to bread it and to make it crispy is flour, eggs, and panko. So this is what's gonna make up the breading that makes it super crispy when we deep fry it. But you need to prepare the cabbage first. So cabbage on its own, it's a little musky. It can have a squishy kind of texture to it. There's a step you guys can go through to make this literally 10 times better. You're gonna give this an ice bath. But even before that, you wanna cut this really, really thin. In Japan, when they do tonkatsu dinner, the cabbage is super thin. So I'm gonna show you all the tools that you need to do this. Hopefully you guys have it, because it's really hard to do it unless you have these. So you could slice it thin with a knife, but I prefer a mandolin. This is a Benreiner mandolin. It's from Japan. It's made specifically, I think, for cabbage or to slice things super thin. You're gonna wanna have an ice bath ready as well. This is where you're gonna put the cabbage after you slice it. And then I have a vegetable strainer. This is what's gonna get it nice and dry, but what I like to do is I put it right into the ice bath, and then that way it strains all the ice from the water, and then you put the cabbage in there and then let it sit in there for 45 minutes. I like to just peel off the outside layer. This is usually almost always not worth saving in my opinion. It's squishy, people have touched it, and yeah, I just kind of get rid of it. It's all good. I am gonna chop it so it's a little bit more manageable. And then there you go. So if you wanted, you could take your knife and cut it really thin. If you're good at slicing vegetables, you can totally do this. I would suggest having a super sharp knife, but I like using this tool right here. You want to get it to where it's almost too thin, because surprisingly in Japan, it's so thin that it's got a completely different experience when you eat it. Normally I have a glove that protects my hand, but I can't find it. It's crazy how thin this tool can get this cabbage, but it makes all the difference. Sometimes Judy will prepare this and she doesn't know how to adjust the blade, and it doesn't turn out as thin, and it changes the whole experience. But this is about how thin you want it. I mean, I'm gonna go ahead and throw this into the ice bath right now. This is gonna both take away a little bit of the muskiness, and it's gonna crisp it up a little bit because you're putting it back into the ice water. And I've found that this works for other vegetables, similar to like cilantro. So I'm gonna do it with the rest of this cabbage and then move on to preparing the pork. Sometimes there's parts that fall off the cabbage, and I just slice it super thin, super slowly with my knife. As I mentioned, if your knife is very, very sharp, it's going to be much easier to mimic the mandolin. I find this method is actually faster. It just takes a little bit more concentration. Even though that's thin, it's not nearly as thin as a mandolin. All you do is let it sit in this ice water for 45 minutes and then drain it later just before you're gonna eat. So for the pork, as I mentioned, there are some cuts that have the bone in it. I'm gonna slice it off, and then afterwards, I'm gonna do something I've been doing to steak. I'm gonna pat dry it, salt and pepper it, and then put it back in the fridge. Now I'm gonna cook in probably about an hour from now, but in that hour, what the fridge is going to do, it's gonna dry out the outside. My theory is that it's gonna be dry enough to where the batter sticks even more. The thing about tonkatsu, or more specifically chicken katsu in America, sometimes the panko, the crispy outside, separates from the meat. In Japan though, tonkatsu, I don't know how they bread it, but it's literally tight against the meat, and that's what you want. You don't want that air gap. So that's what I'm gonna do today. I've never done it with pork, but I'm gonna do it just like when I do it with steak, because it helps dry out the outside, and the salt will kind of sink into the meat a little bit, so it should be way better. This is from my favorite pork company around. It's called Jack Mountain. There's another one locally, which I also like too, but this one a little bit further north. I thought they went out of business, so I was really happy when I saw that they're selling their pork again. If you live in Washington, Jack Mountain. See this piece right here? It's got the bones in it. I'm still going to bread this and batter it because it's gonna be delicious. It's just gonna have bones, and this will just be for me to kind of gnaw on. This part with all the fat in it, I'm gonna separate this chunk from it. I will be using this. This is gonna be a nice juicy fat piece. Something that they say you should do is score the edges like this of the fat, and this keeps it from curling. Usually you want a little sharper knife than that, but this will be fine. Just like this. Just like that. Just barely. It doesn't need to be a lot, and I'm gonna probably tenderize these as well. Okay, now these are just straight up pork chops, no bones in it. Same thing, I'm gonna score the fat a little bit, just so that it doesn't curl up. So this part is not as much for tenderizing as it is just to flatten it out a little bit. It does obviously tenderize the meat. In Japan, they actually like to keep it thick, but for the kids, it's just a little easier to eat when I do this. Flip it over. Also makes it so it's easier for me to cook, and I don't have to check the temp when it's more thin. As I mentioned, in Japan, they have really thick katsu. I mean, it's pretty incredible. So it's very tender, it's very juicy, and it doesn't get dried out. I haven't mastered that method of making tonkatsu, so this is just a little bit easier. Go ahead and move these over. I had to get a second rack, just like that. Do the other ones now. You can totally skip this step, but it will make your life way easier. Okay, now I'm just gonna salt and pepper it. I'm only gonna do one side. There's no need to do both. Definitely be very liberal with this, because when it goes into that batter, a little bit probably does come off. I am gonna also do some white pepper too. Now I'm just gonna put this in the fridge and let it sit for the next 45 minutes. Alright, so the reason I'm doing this is because with pork fat, it kind of clings on to the sides. In fact, I warm up the bottles so it comes out of the glass a little easier. I've got plenty of pork fat in there, but I want to get every little drop if I can. And I've got the control freak going to start warming up the oil so that I can deep fry right away. This is my little assistant, Minnie. She's making me some snacks while I cook. Oh, wow, let me try this. Wow, that's so good. I'm gonna go ahead and get everything set up for me to bread the pork. Got all my bowls, got my ingredients. Gotta get the breading station ready now. First thing is the flour, basic, just put it in there. You don't really need that much flour. Next, the eggs. So one thing with the panko is I don't put all the panko in there. Every time I bread some pork, I add a little bit of extra panko on top so you get some fresh breadcrumbs. So I'm just gonna put enough to get going, and then every time I bread the pork, I put a little bit more. Breading station ready. You know, I totally forgot to pat dry it, but what's interesting is that fridge did exactly what I wanted it to do, which is dry all this meat off. I'm just gonna pat dry the side that didn't get salt and peppered. Flour first, just a light coating, not too much. On the sides too, very important. Like I really shake it off like that, right into the egg mixture. Then right in the panko. Get it on there. I learned this from my friend Matt. You really wanna press that breading in there. There you go, done. I'll do that with the rest of the first tray. You really want to smash that panko into that pork. All right, so I've got the temperature set to 350 degrees because this is called the Control Freak. This little probe right here is measuring the actual temperature of the oil. One thing that's important, don't want to overcrowd your pot and flood your oil. So I'm just gonna do 2 pieces. These are pretty heavy pieces of pork, so this is more than I would normally do with chicken. But this pan or this pot can totally handle this. This is a stop pot. So there's a lot of residual heat in there. Plus with the probe and the Control Freak, it's gonna deep fry this perfectly. I'm gonna just set the timer, even though I will be watching it, for 5 minutes. And it should cook probably even before then. I'll do 4.5 minutes. Okay, it's been about 4 minutes. I do like to just flip it. Oh my God, that looks so amazing. I'm just going to give it a turn. Oh baby, we're in business. So one little signal that whatever you're deep frying is almost done is when your meat starts floating, and it's definitely floating. One thing that I didn't account for because I didn't prepare early enough, this pork was still cold when I breaded it. And ideally you want it to be room temperature or at least sitting out for an hour. So it dropped the temperature of the oil quite a bit. Something I like to do is I take a basket. This is a fry basket. I got this actually with Le Creuset, and I lean the pork katsu up against the side like that so that it can do 2 things. One, drain and cool off just slightly without cooling off too much. So here, I'll show you what this looks like inside. All the oil that's dripping off the pork is going right back into the pot, so you don't waste that oil. So the last 2 were a little overcooked. They're still going to be delicious and the kids won't notice a difference, but this time I'm only going to cook these for a little bit less than 5 minutes. Woo! Yeah. Oh yeah. There we go. Nice and crispy. That panko isn't separating from the pork. That is what you want. Inside pieces, look, clinging right onto the protein. My favorite part right here, the little fatty piece on the corner. Ooh, just gonna eat that right now. Katsu. What I do is I take this cabbage, I put it into the spinner, which I wasn't recording. I put it in there already. Then I spin it. I do 2 spins. This is already pretty dry, but there's a lot of liquid in there. You see that? Toss it a little bit. Spin it a second time. Super dry. This is gonna guarantee you get good contact with the salad dressing. Doesn't turn into a soupy mess. Judy's about to taste a rustic one.
That's more flavor. Good.
Is it more moist? Dad, what do you think?
It's worth waiting for this. I love it.
It's worth waiting. I know, it took a while. What's going on with you? Hey, do you like the katsu?
They love it.
Okay, that's good.
What I'm gonna do is gonna make Daddy a cat face. And these are the ears, or it'll be the part of the eyes or the mouth. I'm not sure yet. Because most of them are just triangles. We ran out of like the big sheets, so I'm using small sheets that were left over. Now I need to cut more triangles because that's basically most of the stuff we're gonna use, because the cat ears are triangles and the mouth I'm probably gonna do triangles, and then the nose is triangles. So yeah. So now first you have to cut it kind of like a V, and then I'm gonna face it. Look it. Yep. See that? I need to add the nose. Okay, this is all made by triangles, but now I need to add some ears. And I made a ball with my wet hands. I was so sick. See, and then you add one of them. So you have the wet hands. And then you grab the ball, go put it on. And now we're just gonna design to the ears. I'm just gonna squares, kind of squares. This one's just gonna be smaller. Ta-da!
Wow,
It's a panda.
amazing, thank you. This is Mia's creation. Little panda rice ball with the katsu, looking delicious. Get my chopsticks. Let me try this. Katsu's already got the bulldog sauce on there. This one is a rustic pork chop. It has a lot more fat in it, so it's not as dry. I'm eating the ear. We've got the Kewpie sesame dressing. It is very traditional. When I say traditional, it's just what's popular to put on here. The balance of the crisp cabbage with that cold sesame dressing. With that deep fried katsu. And the rice. Whenever I eat katsu, I like to have kimchi with it too. It's a nice balance. I typically like to have some kind of hot sauce with my food. And so for katsu dinners, it's always kimchi.